Welcome everyone. My name is Terry Kruger, and I work with Convergence Networks. And today, this Thursday, the 20th, we're here to talking about driving business growth with smarter IT strategy. So let's get into it. So, who do we have on this call this afternoon? We have myself. I'm in charge of sales and marketing for Convergence Networks. I have roughly 15 years of experience helping businesses of all sizes drive profitability, drive performance with making sure they have the right architecture and right plans when thinking about IT and IT services. To the right of me, you'll see Mr. John McCloskey. He is also a very experienced professional. He's a vCIO with our organization. He has 13 years of experience, and he focuses on understanding clients' needs at the beginning of a relationship and working with them in their life cycle, helping them plan appropriately for technology upgrades, moves, shifts, and changes to their business. He's a vCIO. And then we have Adam Crate, who's our Director of Strategic Services. He has over 20 years of dedicated experience working with all different types of businesses, helping them align technology with business outcomes. So together we're roughly 60 years old of experience, and we'd like to walk you through how we approach things and how you should be looking at your business to drive better results. Moving on. So what do we do here at Convergence Networks? Simply put, we deliver secure, reliable, and resilient IT solutions that help drive business growth. And we do that in many different facets, but some of our main core focuses are managed IT, so service desk and helping you on everyday needs, to vCIO and strategy, which is what we're here today to talk about, including cybersecurity, compliance needs, not just CMMC, but HIPAA, ISO 27001, required pen tests. We do cloud, we do Microsoft services, and ultimately, with the evolution of what's taking place in our world, AI. Moving on. So, what are we going to cover today? And so, we've already covered introductions, but we'll talk about technology and business trends, how that impacts what we're going to review today through IT maturity overview. So where are you at in your business's life cycle and how you should be thinking about where you're at? Ultimately leads into strategic planning and road mapping, following modernization journey. So what does that modernization journey look like for you and for most businesses? Ultimately talking about budgeting and guidance, and then we'll end with key takeaways. And last but definitely not least are questions and answers. So if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to put them in the chat. We will read them. And if there is a way for me to work them in naturally, I will. We'll try to address them right away because it is truly what you want to hear. And that's what we're here to do today, is provide you information that you can actually take away and do something with. Moving on. So no surprise, technology is moving super fast, and it's moving faster than people and businesses can adapt with today. There's a study out there that often states that technology would be changing at a rate of every 3 months, but the one thing that's slowing it down is the ability for people to actually interpret that change and to put it into usefulness for their everyday lives, learning in. And so how has this changed, right? Remote work, the way that we work remotely, the way that we can connect remotely, security, connectivity, and culture had to keep pace with this change. And the cloud went from this idea in the early 2000s of something that might make it easier to do business to a foundational element of how we approach applications, file shares, etc. And so innovation and compliance must advance together. So keeping your network secure and how you get to the next level of your business must be looked at the same time. And then last but not least, what you see is AI is not the future. It's already been here, and it's been here for a long time. So having the proper AI strategy and how you approach it ultimately drives business growth faster than taking a broad approach to it. Moving on. So, what I'd like to say is with the ever evolving technology landscape that is traveling so fast, what's happened here is it's also allowed for a lot of risk to occur to small to medium sized business. With the evolution of AI and the ability for everyone to have access to it, what it's done is it's created a lot of risk for the SMB market, so the small and mid-sized businesses, for cyber attacks. Cyber criminals know small and mid-sized organizations often still interact with financial data, client information, and operational data of people that they do business with, not only their clients, but their vendors. And so in today's world, what we're seeing it's impossible to build a huge cybersecurity team or build it internally to keep up with cybersecurity best practices. And a lot of these businesses are facing significant reputational and compliance risks if a breach were to occur. And so, because of this, you cannot afford downtime because every hour impacts your clients, it impacts your revenue, it impacts your reputation. And so, this is some of the risk that's associated with this ever evolving landscape. And when we talk to you today about how do you go about future planning, you'll see some of these risk elements built in. So, every company now is a technology company. It's no longer are the days of, hey, I produce this widget or I help this patient with this thing. I it it stopped, and it stopped there. And so what I mean by that is you're no longer competing on product or a service that you're providing. You're competing on an experience. How is it that you get that widget, and how easy is it for your clients to interact with your system or do business with you? Or how is that patient experience on the other end of the side? Is it easy to book an appointment? Is it easy to interact with the doctor? Is it easy to get patient records? And ultimately, is it secure? Like, are we going to have any outcome after those things? And so, with that, moving on, you'll see that the landscape of everything is changed because you're not only just compared to your competitors now, you're compared to the big box names that you're used to seeing day in and day out, with that you interact with month after month. The experience of working with Apple and downloading iTunes, or the order that you get from Amazon that comes the same day or the next day or in 2 days, or the experience from Netflix of being able to customize what you look for based on, or what you watch based on your history. And so today, 71% of consumers expect companies to deliver personalized interactions, and 76% will switch if they don't like their experience. And so the days of competing with just a competitor in your marketplace are gone. You're also competing against the experiences that others are having outside of direct competitors. Next slide. So the role of IT has shifted from keeping the lights on to driving business outcomes. You're no longer responsible for just saying, "Hey, we need to do this thing and it needs to function this way." It's an effort driven progress. What is broken? How do we fix it? To system driven process. How do we build something that drives business forward and is continually improving both the internal employees experience and the end users experience, whether it be a customer, etc. Next slide. So with that, we talked about this changing landscape, how IT and the IT experience has shifted with the emergence of this technology. The next thing that you need to consider in this is the maturity of the organization. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Adam Crate. He's going to talk about maturity models and how you evaluate your organization's maturity to then drive what John's going to be talking about. How do you actually plan and allocate that maturity into this mix that that drives success?
All right. Thanks, Terry. So one of the important things is to make sure you're using some sort of maturity model, an assessment, a framework, a methodology when figuring out where are we now and where are we trying to get to. There's different models to do this, but generally they're all working towards an overall outcome as you mature over time. And the reason for this is when you think of how many groups over the years have done IT planning or strategy planning, and it's, hey, what did we do last year? Let's add a little bit more to it. Or everyone gets in a room, they all think of what's a problem here or there, it goes onto a list, and they try and figure out how to prioritize it. Well, if we don't know where we are and we don't understand our goals, that's where oftentimes these IT projects or solutions get picked out because something sounds good, but it doesn't solve some future actual problem in the organization that's tied to wherever it is you're trying to go as a group, whether that be on budgeting and road mapping or compliance or standardizations, whatever it might be, training your staff. All of these things are all interrelated. And all of this is about understanding where you are from that reactive tactical level as you move towards that proactive strategic landscape. As we get to this next slide here, we can talk about one of these examples, that's the strategy. So where are we? How do we assess ourselves? And when we have the framework and the methodology we go through, we have several of these types of questions that we would typically run through to really help understand where we are, where we're trying to be. But at the most beginning phase, right, this is the beginning, it's the anchor, it's holding you where you are. You're not really moving forward. It's a roadmap it's completely reactive. You're not looking into the future. Things are happening. We'll replace that when it breaks. We're going to experience downtime and just reacting to the moment. As you start scaling, you've got some people paddling you forward. We're actually moving forward. IT strategy is not holding us back. We know what's happening a little bit, 6 months, maybe a year into the future. We have some level of executive engagement, but it's still not fully aligned with the initiatives of the organization. We don't have everyone running in the same direction. We know certain areas that are moving forward for us, but we can definitely do better. And that's where we get into that level 4, level 5, where we're actually innovating. We're not only looking at strategic planning at the executive level, but department level. It's all understood all the way from the front line up to the C-suite, where these things are all taken into account to make sure we're solving for the various areas that are challenging, but it's not being driven by problems, it's driven by the goals of the organization. Everyone's fully aligned. These things are reviewed and planned for in the future. You have at least a 36-month, potentially all the way up to a 5-year horizon view on how things are changing. And of course, anything you said in the beginning is never going to last forever. Things change so frequently, as Terry already said in this space. Technology changes so quickly, but it's having plans to be adaptable. And the more we have these kind of strategies in place and budgets defined, you can adapt, you can be more flexible as you start moving these things forward. So another example of these on the next slide is, how does all of this bring value? So again, is IT holding you back? Is it really providing any value, or is it keeping the lights on? It's a necessary evil, but it's just there. It's not really doing much for you. And as we start to scale and move forward, it can really start setting the business forward, allowing you to do more things, add new capabilities, reduce certain risks, whatever those things are in your business, but they're bringing it towards those organizational goals. And now if you're trying to really grow the organization, add new capabilities, this is where we start innovating and really drive that innovation. If you remember any of those companies that were on the logo list where you're being compared from an experience, a lot of those organizations disrupted industries through technology. They took what was one way of doing it, and through technology, changed the experience for the better and completely changed some industries by looking at how do we create value for us and our customers, deliver transformative ways of changing that service model, if you will. This doesn't apply to every type of organization and industry, but there's a lot of different places where subtle tweaks and changes in the way of thinking can really change the way that you get IT to deliver value for yourself and ultimately for your end customers.
And Adam, wouldn't you say that they're when you're looking through that IT maturity and what they're going through, a business could go all the way to innovation and then back down to scaling or
Yeah.
the beginning. And a good example of that is Blockbuster. Blockbuster was known throughout the nation as the leader in innovating the way that they did movie rentals through having subscription models to get as many movies as you can. Then the newcomer comes on the block, like, a Netflix, and gives you on demand anything that you need when you need it at home. Right. And
Absolutely.
so that's a good example of something like that.
Yeah, and IT strategy, any strategy, it's never done. It's a continuous living, updating type of approach. And we always cycle these things. So you would go through whatever we want to call it, an assessment, a review, strategic planning, but you're constantly going through and updating this at a certain frequency because those plans change. And you can't have the best plan be the leader in the market and just keep doing the same thing over and over. You have to adapt because if you don't, someone else will, like your Blockbuster example. So it's a matter of keeping up with it. And really what the data tells us is those firms that have that digital maturity, that operational level of maturity, they outpace others. So with revenue growth being higher than those lower maturity organizations, return on investment for that digital transformation really brings much more of a return in comparison, better resilience in market changes and downturns. And a big area is that faster adoption. You're more nimble, more able to, as a leadership team, assess current challenges and changes in whatever it might be so that you can change that strategy, adapt it. You're in a better situation to be able to react faster when it's something that's unpredictable. As much as we want to be able to predict and know what's coming, but that's not always the case for everyone. So this really helps with being able to be that nimble and that agile. So once you know where you are as an operating maturity level and where you're trying to get to. Okay? Maybe you're at, we only plan out 3 months in advance. And yeah, we really should be looking 2, 3 years into the future. Now that we know where we're at, how do we decide what do we do first? That's kind of that next step. That's where we get into the technology itself. Generally, we break it down into these 5 categories. Your security, that's everything from your managed detection and response, your antivirus, your MFA, the business continuity side of things. How do we recover in certain situations, backups and high availability environments and all of these kind of things? Productivity optimization. How do we make our people more efficient? How do we optimize spending and costs? Risk mitigation. How do we reduce that risk? Reduce the likelihood of downtime in certain situations, whether that's individuals, applications, equipment in an environment. And of course, the governance side, compliance, that we all have everything from policies to those government regulations and so on. And from a maturity model perspective, although it's a different model in terms of what it is you're looking at, the concept is the same. You want to start at the bottom, call it the foundation. We're putting in foundational items before going and looking at more mature areas. Not everyone needs to aspire to a level 5 across all these categories. Every organization is different. And this is where, when you go through your operating maturity reviews and what you're looking at from a IT and cybersecurity review, it's figuring out where it is you really need to be. So as an example for security, a level 1 item is things like making sure you have proper firewalls and security in place with MFA. A level 3 example might be something with things like data loss protection policies and reducing insider risk capabilities and these kind of things, which are more advanced. If you try to implement something that is a great solution that could be a 3 or a 4 from a maturity perspective, you're likely not getting that return on investment that you would expect if you haven't already established those level 1 foundational items. It's like you're trying to build the second floor of the house, but you haven't finished the foundation yet. Getting those solid pieces in place and having them work for each other gives you that best return on investment. And again, working with, oh, go ahead, Terry.
Absolutely. And we're seeing this a lot in businesses today is we're seeing businesses come in and wanting to do level 5 and level 4 without doing the basics first. I sort of liken it to, hey, I've got this idea and I've got a problem with my leg, going into the doctors and telling them what's wrong with your leg without actually seeing a trained professional on it. And driving business in sometimes the wrong direction. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, unfortunately, I've seen, and I'm sure all of us have seen or heard of different IT projects that have gone terribly wrong for various reasons. And oftentimes there's some pretty high profile cases of this as well in very large companies where something is seen at a conference, there's a single meeting taking place, that there is a true problem that needs to be solved, but not understanding that you're not going to get the benefits of implementing that complex solution without understanding all the other implications and the other things that are needed. Unfortunately, in IT, there's certain things there's an order of operations, there's a prerequisite to really allow something to bring the value that's there. And this is extremely important in the new speed at which AI is changing. That's something John's going to talk a little bit more about later. And the order of operations of that is extremely important, because security is a big, big component of making sure that AI can be done in the right way. And on this next slide here, we've got a little bit more on all of the kind of the areas of security, because this is such an important component. There's that traditional local environment that has to be secured, and then we get out to that next layer of the modern attack perimeter and so many different components. Again, at that base layer, everything from your firewall that's protecting the network to the MFA, and then we have to get to all the identities, and that keeps expanding. And AI is a big component. And when we start introducing AI, which is a force multiplier when it comes to finding productivity internally, the capabilities of AI are just growing so fast. The challenge is the security implications it have. So we can't have certain things to outstep. Maybe we want to be pretty advanced in productivity and AI, but if we are improving that area at a pace and not keeping up on the security side, we're potentially opening ourselves up to too much risk. As every time you start putting these AI solutions in place, it really does open more into the capabilities of all the information that people have access to. So we have to make sure we're finding that right balance as we move all those things forward. All right. John, I'll let you go a little bit more into the vCIO experience here.
Yeah, before we do that, Adam, I noticed a question in the Q&A saying, what would be an example of a level 5 security maturity? Do you have a good example you might be able to share?
One of the things that I'm trying to think of something that's less technical, because generally as you get up the maturity, you get pretty technical in nature, but I'll call it zero trust. This is a bit of a marketing term that some may have heard of. Zero trust is the idea of you're not trusting anything, you're always verifying before accepting. And what most organizations have is a non-zero trust model, because that's how the industry has been for years and years. You have a password, you're granted access as soon as you are assumed to be the person you say you are. Whereas the new zero trust models are, it's trust verify before access. And at that highest level, it's everything in your environment is following that zero trust model. So as a simple example, something like a workstation in most environments, your computer could access, based on permissions, you can access the local server if you still have local servers environments, or the local printer. And in theory, from a networking perspective, it could communicate with someone else's machine on that same network. In a true zero trust environment, if, let's say, John, your machine has no need to speak to my machine in the same office, zero trust would prevent that from happening. And all of those kinds of layers really helps from a security perspective, because if there's a breach, it prevents what's called lateral movement, lateral spread. So that attacker gets in and they're really isolated. It makes them extremely difficult for them to move beyond their initial breach point. So that's a really high level concept of what would be considered a level 5 across the environment. And this goes even further with more active threat hunting, where you're doing much more advanced attacks on your own network as a way to protect it, and things called honeypots to attract the bad actors, and that's what they attack versus the real data sets in your environment. So there's a whole host of these things in all the various categories. Happy to go through those in detail in a separate call.
Definitely. Thanks for answering that. And to the attendees here, please keep those questions coming. Just as Terry mentioned at the outset, we'd love to answer those in line as we go forward, but of course, we'll still have some Q&A at the end. So I guess describing kind of our approach to this, obviously hearing Adam talk, there are a lot of different things to consider when we're considering IT as a driver of business growth. And, generally as a vCIO, I work with, two different poles of clients, with a nice good gradient in between. On one end, you've got the clients that look at this stuff and hear all of this, and they don't have an internal IT person, and they're not very technical, and they immediately get deer in the headlights, right? And it turns into a situation of they're just overwhelmed with all these different things that can either mitigate risk or provide opportunity to move forward, but they're in a lockup position and they don't know how to start, how to take those next few steps on that journey toward higher operational maturity. On the other side of the spectrum, what we have are the organizations that have internal IT staff or internal IT departments where they're great at understanding the challenges of the specific business they're in right now, but it's a little bit with horse blinders on, if you will, right? To where they don't really understand what else is possible out in the environment because they've been so focused on the ongoing challenges within the business as it exists. And so they need some help kind of broadening that horizon a little bit to see what else is possible and how they can really be a better driver for growth instead of just keeping the lights on. And so what a BCO like me does is we operate along these four different lines that you can see on screen here. We really help to understand all these different things, all these different challenges and opportunities, and lay them out in a risk-driven model that says, here's how we address these over a period of time. For some organizations that wish to move rapidly, it's over a 1-year period. For other organizations that want to be a little bit more deliberate with how they invest in IT, it's over a 3 or a 5-year period. But it's the vCIO's job to take in all of these different inputs to help understand the knowns that are out there, but then also to do the gap analysis to discover the unknowns that are out there and bring all these into a roadmap that helps ensure we're driving some of that growth that Adam was talking about. Now, of course, any sort of initiative that we take across the environment is likely going to have a cost associated with it. And that's either a cost in purchasing hardware or licensing, or it's just in the labor to put these different things in place. And so we want to make sure that we truly understand all of those costs from an explicit and implicit level and build that into a budget so that all right, I want to do this big initiative. Here's what it's going to cost. Here's when it's going to be. That all comes together in the roadmap so that you can properly plan for all of these costs. Because I know I'm talking to a bunch of, business owners or decision makers. Y'all hate any sort of unexpected costs, and we want to try to plan for as much as we can so that you can really understand what your budget is going forward. Now, another big experience that we have as VCIOs is strategic vendor management. In fact, I'm going through this right now with one of my law firm clients. In fact, just had a call this morning with a potential vendor that's going to help consult with really modernizing their practice management application. We're going through with interviews with a few different consultants right now to help to understand all the different facets of this practice management software, as well as the different applications and pieces of software that interact with that help to create a positive experience for their users, for their clients. And so I'm really helping to facilitate those calls and really understanding not only what are the day-to-day things that are going to be impacted, but the technical aspects and how we ensure that we're securing data, how we're ensuring that we make it to where staff can still access things in a reliable way. And so we work along those lines with strategic vendors to help manage those experiences and make it to where we're not just chasing shiny objects, but we're making sure it's going to integrate with the technology appropriately and get really the best value out of that investment. And then finally, where we shine the most is when we start to get to that operational level of maturity of a level 4 or a level 5, when we're engaging with the executives at the environment. And so it's quote unquote relatively easy just to handle all the technological gobbledygook and just say, all right, here's a thing, do it. There's a thing, do it. Just like Adam said, kind of that OML level, kind of a 1 or a 2. But again, where we really start to help organizations see better benefit and better advancement through IT and through technology, it's when we're sitting in that boardroom alongside the executives, understanding where the business is going and helping technology to be a driver of that. And so moving on to the next slide here,
John, can I
what
interrupt
does,
for a quick
yeah,
second? I
go
want
nuts,
to
Adam. Yeah,
add
yeah.
something that you had mentioned there that I definitely see when I look at all of the vCIOs that we have here and where when I hear from customers and where we're really helping a lot, it's that you mentioned facilitating. We're really facilitating and helping walk you through this whole process that John's really about to go through. But in other areas, there's so many challenges that groups have that you experience once ever, or maybe once every 5 years or something like that. And it's a whole experience. And you have to figure out and reinvent the wheel, if you will, individually every time you go through that type of whatever it might be. Whereas John and our other VSOs, we go through these things potentially once a month, once a week, depending on what it is. So we can really short circuit that cycle and really walk you through, hold your hand through it to make it extremely simple, especially with a lot of these third party vendors where we're working with various groups all the time. And that's just something that came to mind as you were mentioning that as a way that we can really streamline that process.
Yeah, and again, I think it kind of calls back to how I started the previous slide. A lot of organizations either have that deer in the headlights or they're just used to one way of doing things. And we help to broaden that just based off the broad experience that we have across multiple different industries, multiple different clients. And frankly, we're doing this sort of stuff all the time. So it's not like we're starting from square zero learning as we go alongside you.
Absolutely.
So, what does the planning process really look like? And kind of breaks into three general phases. The first one is, assessment, understanding what's going on in the organization. So it's looking at all the technological systems and seeing how they interact with each other, seeing how data flows through the organization. But it's also really talking with your staff and understanding how they're interacting with it, where some of those challenges and pain points are, where some opportunities are that they've seen but haven't really been able to enact yet because technology is holding them back. And then also, we're just kind of identifying just from our own discovery some of those risks, some of those opportunities that we might see from an outsider's viewpoint looking in at your business. Now, after we gather all this information, after we've done all of this discovery, then we start to analyze. And so this is working to understand all of that information. So really kind of tying that back to the organization's goals, to what your vision is. Again, just like I said a moment ago, sitting in on those meetings with your executive team. So pulling all of what we discovered into where the organization is going and seeing, all right, well, where are the synergies here? Where can we do this one thing with technology that's going to drive this business goal or be part of this vision that you've created for the organization? So we take those different things and start to create that alignment. Once we've done that, we start to perform additional gap analysis to make sure of, okay, here's where this general idea is. Here's where we think it's going to fit. But where are the holes that need to be poked into it? What else do we need to do as a step 1, 2, or 3 before we do this step 4, 5, or 6? And again, that's all coming together inside of a general roadmap experience to say, all right, here are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And there could even be a 7, 8, 9, but we're not quite ready to get into that yet. So we're just going to tuck those off to the side, but still keep them visible so that we know that, hey, at some point we'll come back to these things, but it's just not the right time to do that sort of thing. So moving on, let's talk about a couple of different examples here. So, sorry, go
So,
ahead, Terry. I
John,
see you came off mute. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And so just to summarize that, basically you need to seek to understand where you're at today, what the current state of everything is. Then you need to look at what those goals are and where you're looking to go, and then create the plan of attack. Is that accurate?
You got it. That's exactly it. So you want to be
Right.
methodical about the process instead of just jumping to shiny object syndrome, saying, here's this new cool thing I want to do, and then just jumping right on that and having it be a failed project or a failed initiative. So one of the first examples we see with a lot of new clients is they're coming to us with really kind of a hybridized network. They've got some servers they're still running, but they're already in Microsoft 365. They may not be making the most of their existing investment in 365. They're frustrated with some of the experience they've got with their servers, and they say, hey, John, take me to the cloud. Okay, great. There's a couple of different ways to consider this. And again, this is some of that low level stuff that Adam had mentioned. It's really level 1 or level 2 maturity, just the underlying infrastructure. It's not necessarily moving the organization forward, but it's kind of holding you back. It's that anchor that he was talking about earlier. So there are two different directions generally that you can take with this. Option number one is just to say, I'm sick of those servers in the corner. The internet always goes down at my office, or the server itself is just unstable. I don't want that anymore. I don't want that experience anymore. Just take me to the cloud. And it's essentially just a lift and shift. Take all the stuff you got today, multiple different ways to do it, but hey, let's just move it all up to the cloud and let's make it to where my staff can use it there. And now we've reduced all of that site risk that we've got right now in keeping it on site at my office. Now, the biggest win from this is it's fast. All right, it's done, right? But there are higher upfront costs of this because you're kind of bringing along some of the sins of the past when you do that. So one of the biggest examples I see most often is a client has a file share that's just been there for decades, and there's all sorts of gobbledygook and garbage inside of it. And now we've just taken the problem from being inside of our building to being in another building, essentially in the cloud, right? And so we really haven't helped to the degree that we can with improving the user experience, improving the client or vendor experience as well, in interacting with your staff and with that data. So the other approach, the one we typically like to take with our clients, is to really take our time with this and to continue this hybridized approach, saying, all right, well, what is the critical endpoint that we need to meet? A common one I see with my clients is, hey, the server is going to be end of life coming up at the end of next year. Well, okay, great. Let's work backwards. What are the workloads on your servers right now? How do we start to methodically take the data off of them, take the management layer off, take printing off? How do we do that over a period of time so that we're really managing the pace of change for you and your staff to where they're not completely overwhelmed with a whole bunch of change? And the side benefit is now we're leaving a lot of the challenges of the past, a lot of the problems of the past behind us as we move forward into the cloud. So really the consequence of this is that the ROI isn't as quick. It's a little bit more gradual, but we're disrupting everything along your work processes a lot lower than we were just going to do a lift and shift. So the big takeaway across this example is that really modernization is going to be a journey. And it's best for us to consider all of these different little endpoints as we move forward toward moving to the cloud. And really, those roadmap phases that we build together really matter because it helps to understand, right? Well, coming up in quarter one, we're going to move your files. Here's what it's going to look and it's going to feel like. Quarter two, we're going to move the management of your users and your workstations, those sorts of things. That is that journey. But now we understand it together, and now we can manage that change appropriately with everyone.
And
So moving
John,
on.
wouldn't you say that this sort of ties into what I was talking about earlier, that humans can only take so much change at once? And so to get high adoption of systems and the changes you do, you should take a stair-stepped approach to moving to the next era of where your infrastructure or how you operate is.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Now that said, every so often we have a circumstance with the client where they say, hey, um, some reason like this line of business app vendor, they're going out of business next month, and oh my God, we got to move all the data out into a new app right away. Help. Okay, great. Well, then we have to move quickly to do that sort of thing. But given ideal circumstances, yeah, it's really about the human element and making sure that you're not overwhelming your staff who are already so busy living in the day to day of your business that trying to throw two, three, four, five different new tools at them or new ways of working at them, it's just going to result in more stress, lost productivity, and potentially some folks just waving the white flag and saying, that's it, I'm out of here. Right. So,
One thing I can add to this as well is I was talking about the importance of establishing the organizational goals and that time horizon. How far are we looking into the future? Because when you're looking at these kinds of solution sets, if outside of IT, but if your organizational plans are maybe we're moving to a new office, or we're going to be 100% remote work, or we're anticipating a certain security and compliance requirement in 2.5 years. If you know that's what you're working towards down the line, or these larger impacts are coming, that impacts these solutions. Otherwise, you're investing in making changes that you're just going to have to do over again, and you have some costs that you can't fully understand. So that longer time horizon really helps in that initial planning to make sure that all of what you're investing is bringing as much value as possible.
Exactly. You brought up a great example too. I mean, I have clients all the time that say I'm moving to a new facility or opening a new office, and we say, "Oh my goodness, let's get as far ahead of that as we can to make sure that we make it a good experience for you and your staff." Right? So I guess moving to the next example, this is where we move up a little higher into the maturity stack, so more to a level 3 or level 4. Folks, just like Terry said earlier, AI is here. It's not coming, it's here. And so what I've been hearing a lot over this year especially has been, hey, my CEO just, saw this advertisement for Copilot and started getting really excited about putting agents in place that could do all sorts of really great things to ensure that we remove FTEs or make it to where my staff can operate more efficiently. How quickly can we jump on this? Well, there are two ways to think about that too, right? So option number one is to just jump on the shiny object, right? And to say, all right, we're going to take on a big Microsoft Copilot deployment across all staff. And we're going to roll it out to all departments and it's going to be great. And everyone's going to be able to use all these great tools to save so much time. What's good about that approach is now, all right, cool, you've put this really powerful tool in place for everyone. The challenge, though, is that just because it's a fancy new tool doesn't mean it's going to solve all the right challenges that you have as a business. You may not necessarily need AI in certain departments right now. That could come at some point in the future. And so, again, we're throwing a lot of new stuff on your staff, but you may not see really good ROI out of it because here's this fancy, expensive tool that you rolled out and you've trained everyone on. Now they're not using it. Now they're not getting value out of it. So really the better option is to move more towards an option two, is to work a little bit more gradually to create essentially a steering committee for AI amongst your organization and say, hey, let's pull in maybe one or two people out of each department and let's set them up with the tools and have them start to play with it and start to share their experiences, where it's working, where it's falling short. And critically, you want to make sure that you choose people who are going to geek out on this stuff. We're really going to put it through its paces, not someone who just says, oh, here's this fancy new tool, but I'm just too busy. I'm not going to use it. Or I'm smarter than the computers and I'm just going to do it myself and never ever use the AI, right? So what you're going to see is you're going to see really lower resistance as you start to grow into this and see, which departments need to expand it more, which other departments don't need it yet, but we need it a little bit further down the road. So the efficiency gains are going to be a little more slow, but it's going to help ensure that you're making the right investment in the right areas. One big thing that is a little outside the scope of this conversation today is just the security impacts of AI. I know we've held plenty of webinars and have plenty of information written about this and considering the security of your data when you point a large language model out at making sure that, something that truly is confidential on one side of the business doesn't get accidentally shared with the model than is shared with other people further down the business that should never see that data. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you really want to do on the front end if you want to keep the right eyes on the right data. And that's all part of that second approach. Find out where it's necessary, where it can be used to the most benefit, and then start to layer in that security to make sure the right eyes get on the right data. So again, really
That
similar
being
to that
said,
prior. Yeah.
that being said, we got a question in here real quick. And I think this is relevant because we just talked about this. Hey, we're doing this all at once, or we're doing this stair-stepped approach. But when do you make that decision? And how do you decide when is the right time to upgrade systems that you're using time in and time out?
Conversation, right? This is when we get into the consulting side of the vCIO, understanding where the pain points are right now with the business, where the opportunities are, sharing, hey, here are different ways of doing things. Have you considered not only the explicit costs of migrating to newer systems, but the implicit costs, the amount of time that your staff is spending on manual activities or just in things that you've built up over time as a process and a way of doing business that frankly may have created some waste in the system at some point in the past. If you're not following like a Kaizen approach, for instance, if you're a manufacturer, then you probably have a lot of waste that can be removed. And so really it's about bringing in a new set of eyes of vCIO to help have these conversations and help see whether or not there is good ROI out of an upgrade, or to the point you've made here, whether or not we should hold for a little bit and revisit that sort of thing.
And I can add a little bit to that. A lot of it is feedback. It's getting feedback from all levels of staff. And when we do these kind of feedback surveys, we'll often get very different results based on kind of the level of seniority of the individual. Everyone from your front line to your managers, your senior managers, your executives, varying different opinions. And it's really important to get that because oftentimes decisions are only made at the highest levels without all of that feedback and input from everyone else. And those decisions have impacts on those end users. We're not solving all of their challenges or thinking it from their perspective and their experience. And when we start taking all that into account, it can really change the overall direction. And I've seen a lot of groups where when we do this, they'll think the application is fine. Why would we change this? It works completely fine. But when we do those surveys, we'll find out that end users hate it.
Hate it.
It's contentious in the environment. They refuse to use it unless they actually have to, and they try to find workarounds. And that's where we get into what's called shadow IT.
Oh, yeah.
And shadow AI is a thing right now as well, where I can't remember the stat. It's like almost 70% of organizations have internal users using AI because the organization isn't giving it to them. So they're doing it on their own without telling anyone. And that has its own host of security and compliance and challenges with it. So a first step from an AI is better understanding what kind of policy you want. Get that group together, as John was mentioning. Get some basic training for staff. Here's what you can use safely. Almost, I would imagine everyone on this call is using 365, or most of you are. You have a secured version of a basic AI that you can use for that. So that's a great starting point, and then go further along from there.
Adam, to play off of what you said there, what we're also seeing is when people are using shadow IT or having AI and they're using it for business purposes, when it does go time to actually rein it in and put compliance to it, you're seeing morale drop pretty considerably about the people that used to do something a certain way and now they no longer can. And then not understanding the why behind why they are reining those tools in to meet compliance requirements or needs of the business.
And that's just it, right? Making sure that we're getting ahead of what your existing staff or what your new staff, may already be used to in other points of their lives or other points of their careers, and making sure that, they're not just going to go do their own thing and expose your data in the wrong spots. I see a question in there. How do we see AI changing the way personal care is administered in the personal care homes in the near future? Let me put a pin in that and come back to it when we get to the Q&A session, because kind of looking at where we are with time, there's one other really big point I'd like to make here. If we can move to the next slide, please. So how much should you really be investing in a technology approach overall? So on the right side of the screen here, you can see a graph that Gartner pulled together. If you're not familiar with them, they're essentially call it an expert in the IT industry. They help to rate different products. They help to understand different industry segments, those sorts of things. So it shows you all these different percentages that you can see about all these different industry verticals, but that really means something more to the enterprises of the world. Really working with SMBs, who I would expect to be most of the attendees on this call, we really want to think about things a little bit differently. First things first is it's unique to every single one of us what our investment in IT should be. As Adam mentioned at the beginning, if you are an OML1, operational maturity 1 or 2, or you only want to get to 3, then that should determine what you want to invest in IT. But if you really want to use technology as a driver, if you want to get more to an operational maturity 4 or 5, that's going to define how much you need to set aside each year to move the needle. And so really it's about tailoring it to match those business goals and that company culture that you've got. So as Terry mentioned a moment ago, if you've got folks that really want to embrace AI and do more with it, cool, let's start to really put some of these initiatives into our roadmap together to properly secure your environment, roll out AI, make sure you're getting the right ROI out of it. But then also, you really need to understand your tolerance for risk. A lot of organizations I work with, especially given really the financial climate over the last couple of years and some of the uncertainty in it, they start to pull back a little bit and say, hey, look, I'm not going to take that risky venture that I would have done otherwise, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever the case may be. So after you understand that, that helps add into the calculus for how much you're going to invest. And as I mentioned earlier, you want to think about some of those implicit costs as well as your explicit costs. Where are you spending more time in manual processes that really aren't adding to the bottom line of the organization? Adam mentioned earlier too that we want to review this on a regular basis. I mean, business moves fast. You got to improvise, right? So just because you set a strategy and a budget right now in November of 2025 for 2026 doesn't mean it's set in stone for all of 2026, because stuff's gonna happen. And you need to be able to pivot appropriately to address those needs. So while we can come up together with what a roadmap to improvement looks like, we have to assume, hey, some stuff's going to jump in our way that's going to take us on a left turn instead of a right turn. And so again, like anything else, goodness, like Moneyball taught us, right? Make decisions based on data and outcomes, not necessarily instinct. Don't get me wrong, gut instinct has a good role to play in how a lot of you have built your businesses today. But to get to the next level, to move forward, we have to start building in some data and some of those outcomes. So Terry, I know you had some key takeaways for us here before we get into Q&A. You want to get into those?
Yeah, absolutely. And one last thing before I do the key takeaways is I just like to point out, oftentimes in our conversations, what we're having is what should we be spending in a typical year based on our industry. John absolutely hit the nail on the head. It's different and it's different for everyone, but you also have to consider the technical debt that is available for everybody on what it takes to get to up to a standard to even consider some of these projects. So, again, that's all part of the consideration. People should be meeting at least quarterly on planning initiatives like this to understand where you're at and how you're meeting the company's needs. And oftentimes we see clients meet monthly or every other week to ensure that they are staying on pace with where they need to be. But key takeaways here. I know we have about 8 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we do answer a couple of questions that are in the chat. So higher IT maturity drives stronger business results. That is proven. IT strategy must align directly with business goals. When they aren't aligned, it costs more and it's less effective when implementing. A structured CIO or vCIO planning process brings clarity to the future of the organization and the overall goals. Modernization works when people, process, and technology move together in one form or fashion. And so we're all rowing in the same direction. If all those things are aligned, adoption and success of your technology planning works very well. AI requires governance to be safe and effective. You need to be thinking about how to utilize AI and utilize AI in a safe and secure manner first before you allow folks to just openly use it. It inherently puts some risks in there. And so, with that being said, I'd like to open it up to questions. We have one right now that's we'd like to address. And so, John, you said let's put a pin in this. But how do we see AI changing the way that personal care is administered in personal care homes in the near future?
Yeah, I think the most obvious one, of course, is, the potential reams of historical private health information that could be, about any sort of patient that you've got out there. It takes a long time to truly read and understand that information. It's easy to overlook things. And AI just takes that time and smashes it down into just a couple of seconds or just a couple of minutes, assuming you've got AI pointed at the right data sets, right? So that can help care providers to really more efficiently walk into a situation, know what the challenges are, know what the risks are, and then go from there. But even aside from that, kind of broadening out a little bit more, one of the big things that we all need to consider about AI is that it's not going to give you the right answers 100% of the time. It's a starter, not a finisher. So a good thing we like to kind of coach our clients on is to say that, AI is going to get you 70 to 80% of the way there. It's going to do a lot of that discovery grunt work for you, but then you got to take it that remaining 20 to 30% to ensure that number one, you're not getting AI slop, or number two, that it's really answering the question that you asked appropriately to where you can have the right answer. Now, granted, large language models continue to advance and continue to develop, and we're going to see these things get better over time. But for right now, it's really more of a tool, less of an automated answer factory. So definitely as time goes on, when we think about personal care, additional, investment into AI can help to slim some of those times of discovery and help to also identify different areas where you might choose to go with one sort of patient care routine instead of another routine. I hope I answered your question okay. If not, definitely ask something a little bit different in there. So, yeah, Anthony, I see you putting in there the percentage spending targets are not very realistic in any organizations. Yeah, SaaS and cloud have really moved more toward, perpetual license. We're seeing that everywhere, right? Not just against what's hitting our businesses, but, raise your hand if you've got a Netflix account, an Amazon account, an HBO account, right? I mean, it's all over the place. Organizations care more about MRR, monthly recurring revenue, than they do about just kind of that transactional experience that we've had in the past. And yeah, I totally agree with you, Anthony. I don't know how much faith I truly put in to that stuff on the right side of the slide that I shared earlier. Again, if you think about an enterprise shop, that sort of thing, that may make a little bit more sense there. But for us in the SMB marketplace, it's really more about identifying opportunities, risks, those sorts of things, and saying, all right, how much do I need to budget really to move the needle for me? I hope I kind of helped with that. If I didn't answer you appropriately, definitely please add on in the Q&A. Are there
And we're
any other
seeing,
questions? Yeah.
we're also seeing a trend in industries. This is based on 2025 data. I assume that it was released in 2025, so it's
Yeah.
based off of 2024 data. You're seeing the overall spend trend higher in all industries based on the way that they classify and consider technology spend in today's world too. What we are seeing over the years is the spend is growing higher as a percentage of revenue in every industry, not just particular industries.
All right. Are there any other questions we can help answer?
I can add one quick last thought because this kind of came up a little bit earlier as a question was, how do you know you've done your operating maturity level review and you know where you want to be? You've done that level of gap assessment, but how do we know what's a level 1 versus a level 3 versus a level 4 type of solution from a technology standpoint? That's where we use these frameworks. And there's frameworks for a whole host of things. There's NIST, there's CIS, there's Cybersecure Canada, and there's all of these various frameworks. And that's what we do. We take all these different frameworks and we put them into one model. And that's how our vCIOs go through and do assessments to figure out what makes the most sense in what order. But it's all based on best practices from all the various industries. And that's where these things come from. So it's not like it's all made up on the spot, because that's what ends up happening when these solutions don't deliver the value you're hoping for.
Any other questions? Oh, well, that looks like it. We appreciate you for joining us today. And a good thing to consider is, will your organization lead or be left behind in this ever-changing landscape of AI and technology? If you have any questions, in the meantime, our contact information will be provided as well as this recorded webinar. We're here to help. We're here to help businesses of all sizes. If you don't know us, we'd love to get to know you and figure out how we can help you. Please feel free to reach out to us. We appreciate everybody's time and hope you have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.